On this episode of Dream Farm, I want to talk about how to make food plots with a limited budget using very few, if any, power tools. It's really easy to make a small food plot. Anybody can do it. So let's go through the steps. In fact, I was just up at the farm yesterday and made one of these poor man plots. So as we're talking about this topic, I'm going to use that spot as kind of a backdrop for the discussion. Dream Farm is brought to you by Whitetail Institute, Research Equals Results, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail App, Hoyt Archery, Stealth Cam Trail Cameras, Wildlife Farming, and PH Outdoors Food Plot Drills. The location that I picked is one that we burned through back in early March. And it was a grassy area. It's out on a point and it's close to a bedding area. And I like spots like this. I like spots where the deer can hit them early in the evenings when they're leaving their bedding areas. Some of these that are outside away from the timber, they may not be that good in the mornings, but they're really good evening spots. If you can make an opening back in the cover, you know, like maybe there's a natural opening there, like maybe an old farmstead, those are great spots for creating these poor man plots because they work really well for both evening and morning hunts. But the one that Jordan and I made yesterday is basically going to be what I would call an evening only spot. But it does serve the purpose of being between the place where the deer bed and where they feed. So that's a really prime location. Anytime you can get between where they bed and where they feed, you're going to get them on their feet a lot earlier in the evening than you would if you were hunting out in the bigger fields. So that's why the spot made sense. The fact that we burned through it made the process of clearing out the spot a lot easier. That's always step number one. You've got to make the opening. You've got to get all the brush out of there. A lot of times that means a chainsaw. And most of the poor man plots that I've built over the years, I've needed a chainsaw. There's small saplings in there, sometimes little cedar trees, just a lot of brush, even multiflora rose, other bushes like that you have to get rid of. And sometimes you can take, like I said, an old farmstead or even the back end of a field that the farmers are no longer farming because their equipment's too big and they can't get all the way back in there and turn around. So they just leave those little corners. And then they grow up to brush and nobody has any interest in them from a farming standpoint, but they're perfect for food plots. Clearing out the brush and getting the plot ready to plant is going to take a couple of things. It's probably going to require, like I said, a chainsaw. And that might be the only piece of power equipment that you need. And you could do it with a handsaw, I guess, but hopefully we're not that poor. Hopefully you've got maybe a neighbor or a friend with a chainsaw that you can borrow if you don't own one. Cut the stump as close to the ground as you can because you're going to be farming over the top of this. And eventually you're going to need to mow this. When I say farming over it, that's kind of a loose term because a poor man plot, we're probably not going to be in there with much equipment, but you are going to have to mow it at some point in order to maintain the plot. So the lower you can cut that to the ground, the better. And like I said, I've made bunches of these. Gosh, I made one that was probably 3 or 4 acres. It took me a whole day with a chainsaw to cut down maybe, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 cedar trees that were growing up in there and some other little saplings. And I took it all the way down to the ground and I used that spot for years and never had any problem with those stumps. So anyway, that's the first point. The key is get it as low to the ground as you can and then spray everything that's there with glyphosate. And it'd be nice to be able to start a poor man plot sometime early in the spring, but it doesn't work very well because you have to have actively growing plants in order to kill them. And you don't want to try to go in there and make a poor man plot and then have it all come up to weeds later. So you got to wait until it's actively growing. And in most parts of the country, that's going to be at least mid-April. And where I'm at, in the northern part of Iowa, it's clear into May because it just takes that long some years for the temperatures to get warm enough for the plants to really take off so you can kill them. Herbicide doesn't work if the plant's not growing actively. So you get a little bit of a late start, but that's only year one. Over the lifetime of the plot, you can get to it sooner and sooner. You just have to be able to get that initial kill. Okay, so We spray it, and depending upon what the plot looks like. And the one that Jordan and I made, and we were lucky, like I said, because we'd burned through there. So everything was already mostly dead. Mostly dead. What is that movie? Princess Bride. I would say most of what was there was dead. And that meant the multiflora rose. There was a lot of small little apple trees trying to grow up in there. And you'd think we probably shouldn't have killed all those little apple trees, but the reality is the farm has thousands of those little apple trees. You can see probably 15 of them in this little half-acre food plot. And there's, boy, dozens of acres out on this ridge. It wasn't the end of the world that I snuffed out a few of these small apple trees and then burned all the grass off, so all the thatch was gone. In a situation like that, you can spray the glyphosate and spread your seed the same day. The glyphosate doesn't affect the seed. It's a contact killer. It only affects things that are growing. So a spot like this where you don't have any thatch because the fire went through before, it's just all green grass and then, basically bare dirt underneath. You can do what we did. You can spray it and you can spread your seed the same day. And then as the weeds and the grass are dying down, they form a little bit of a layer on top of the seed, which is good. But also during that whole time, you're giving the seed extra time to hopefully catch a few rains, get into the topsoil, get embedded, germinate, and start to grow. Otherwise, if you have a lot of thatch there, let's say it's really tall weeds, and there's a lot of dead material in there from the fall or the winter before, maybe there's leaves, and you just think there's no way if I spread my seed on top of this that it's ever going to get to the ground. You don't have any choice there but to spray it and then wait for a couple of weeks for the glyphosate to do its job, and then come back and burn it off after that. So let it die, let it turn brown, then you can burn off everything that you sprayed, plus all the thatch, plus all the leaves, and that definitely works well too. In fact, we've taken it one step further and we've even used landscape rakes, like 3 to 4 foot wide, like a garden rake, but they're really big, and then scuff up the surface of the ground after burning the thatch and the brush and the weeds off in order to create more porosity so it's easier for the seed to get into the ground. The key to any planting is getting that seed to soil contact. So whatever you can do to improve that is going to make the process more effective. So we were able to skip that step on the one that we made yesterday. So we just sprayed it, spread it, and then I'll come back again in a few weeks and I'll spread the fertilizer. I'm going to get in front of the next rain. I just put in clover. I put in the imperial whitetail clover, which is normally my starting point. I like to start my poor man plots in the spring. And then if the seed takes, like if we have a, say, normal to wet summer, then I should have clover, at least the start of a nice clover seeding in the fall. And I can just, let that run its course. But if we have a really dry summer and the clover doesn't take, I have time then to come back in midsummer, say mid-July, late July, and then broadcast my brassicas. And I like the wintergreens blend from Whitetail Institute for a brassicas blend. I've done really well with that on the farm. Our deer just really seem to love that. So anyway, that's kind of plan A and plan B. Generally, you're going to want to get a soil test. Again, I fall back to our sponsor, Whitetail Institute. And I've worked with these guys ever since 1996. I think it was when I planted my first food plot. And that was one of these imperial whitetail clover plots. So I've got a lot of history with them. It's a good company. And this system that they have for soil tests is really handy. They've got an app called Plot Perfection that you can download for free, and you can map out your food plots, and then you can send your soil samples into them, and then they will put the analysis right into the app for you and cross-reference it to that specific food plot. So let's say that you have a field or a plot that you've been testing for 4, 5, 6 years. It's going to show you that database through all that time of how the soil has changed. So, clover is always going to want P and K, and sometimes the dirt's got it. There are spots that I've tested that I didn't have to add, any phosphorus and potassium. But normally, the key is going to be your pH. So you need to find out where your pH is at, so you know whether or not to add pelletized lime or some other solution that will raise the pH. Clover doesn't like acidic soils, so you want to really focus in on that. We've got it planted, we've got it fertilized, it's growing, it's a nice summer, enough moisture. We get about halfway through the summer and we come and visit that spot and it's just full of weeds. It looks terrible. And this is common. I mean, that's basically what you're gonna find. You're gonna have thistles, you're gonna have every kind of weed in there that the land has to offer. You have a couple of options. The best one is to mow it. If you can get a mower in there, I know guys who use, beat up old riding lawn mowers that they get cheap, maybe garage sale mowers. There's lots of push mowers out there that are, past their prime, that you can set them on the high setting and beat them through the brush. Or there's a lot of those walk behind brush mowers. I'm trying to think, I think DR was one brand that's pretty common, but I've seen those for rent. And that's another option, is just to rent something like that and get in there and mow it and get it cleaned up. Because generally the clover will outcompete the weeds once you get them out of the way. Once you cut them down, the clover can then, fight through and outcompete them. It doesn't do well against grass. That's the one thing that you have to watch. If the plot's real grassy, you're probably gonna have to spray it, because it's hard to control grass with mowing. You can control the broadleaf weeds by mowing them, but the grass, that tends to almost reinvigorate every time you mow it. If it's real grassy, you need a clethodim herbicide. That's the active ingredient on the herbicide that will kill the grass out of your clover. So now we have planted, we have fertilized, and we have maintained. And that's really the bulk of what these poor man plots require. There's not a whole lot else that you need to do. So now let's talk about what you need. You're gonna need seed. And I did work out a deal with our sponsor, Whitetail Institute, that they're offering a 20% discount to our viewers. So if you type in BHW24 at checkout, you can get 20% off everything that they sell. You're gonna need a backpack sprayer. They're fairly inexpensive, maybe $100 for a good one. You're gonna need an over-the-shoulder bag spreader, and those are in about the $40 price range. And that's good enough to really do the seed and the fertilizer, and really, I mean, as heavy as it is and as painful as it is, you can even get your pelletized lime down using that bag spreader. If you're not quite on the low budget end, you can get some ATV accessories. You can get an ATV sprayer and you can get an ATV spreader that do a really nice job, but that starts to add up. I mean, price-wise, you're gonna have a few $100s by the time you get done, getting a spreader and a sprayer on your ATV. But that will definitely make the job a lot quicker and a lot easier. But you can get by, like I said, with just a bag spreader. We've also done it just with the old push behind limers that you see guys use when they're fertilizing and liming their yards, the little canister on top of the two little wheels, and that works too. I mean, there's any way that you can get it measurably or controllably distributed onto your plot is fair game. Doesn't matter whether it's expensive or cheap. If it gets that task done, it's going to work. I think that's the main things. I talked about food plot rotations in the most recent episode. You can start thinking about long term. What are you going to put into that plot? Year one, I'm recommending the clover, and then down the line, you've got a lot of options there, because once you get it established, it's a lot easier to keep it going, because you don't have to go back and open it all up again every year, because it's already going, and the deer start using it. I mean, it's one of the best things that you can do in your hunting property, and it doesn't cost much. Anybody can do it. I'm coming back to that point. This really is a solution for everybody. Well, I think I'll stop right there. I appreciate you joining me, And I'll see you right back here again soon for the next episode of Dream Farm. And remember to always dream big.